Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this panel, which is all about data transformation and the people at the heart of change. And I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by my three panelists today. We've got Diane Mayze, who's the Global Head of Data and AI at WPP. Hi, Diana, you're very welcome.
Hello, thanks for having me.
We've got Jennifer Agnes from Cynozure, and she's the MD there. It's an organization that it's a global data analytics strategy consultancy. So hi, Jennifer, you're very welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me, Louise.
And finally, we're joined by Miranda, who is the CEO of METIS Digital, a consultancy that looks at connecting data with people and assets and looking for the opportunity to create value from that data. Miranda is also an advisor to the Mayor of London on the infrastructural panel and a member of the technical advisory panel for the ICO. Hi, Miranda, you're very welcome.
Thank you very much. Lovely to see you all.
Great. So let's get started and hopefully have a really good discussion. So what we've seen over the last 18 months, maybe nearly 20 months now, with the pandemic, is that businesses could never have imagined that they would have to change the way they run. The organizations have had to become virtual, data and digital centric, and extremely agile at a seriously fast pace. They've had to learn new ways to operate, and they want to take some of those practices forward. And also they've identified significant weaknesses when they went to that more remote type model, and they need to address those as well. But even before the pandemic, we saw a rise of organizations becoming more data and digital savvy. So this is an opportunity that's actually been propelled on as a result of the pandemic. And I guess, some organizations think, oh, it's just a matter of throwing a system at it and that will solve the problem. So sort of in that context and bearing all that in mind, I'd be really interested, and I'm going to come to you, Miranda, first. I'd be really interested to know what you think data transformation is and how it actually differs from digital transformation.
Well, that's an enormous question, as I'm sure the rest of the panel and the audience know. And I think just the quick thing to think about is that the answer to everybody's problems is never technology, or never just technology. You can have some wonderful new shiny bit of kit that isn't going to address your organizational culture when it comes to assessing data or the decision-making processes where people have all sorts of criteria for making decisions, and they may not be used to taking into account good data and the views of others when they're making decisions. So I think, I'm not really talking about the difference between them, but I can tell you what it's not. And certainly when the clients I work with post-pandemic have been struck that they found new ways of delivering projects and change in a remote fashion. So they found that they can do things remotely and differently. But now they're asking themselves the hard questions about what's the best way to deliver activity and customer responsiveness. And I think we're going through that very interesting learning curve at the moment.
Thanks. Can I come across to Diane and ask you what your thoughts are?
So I think there's an overlap, but I keep them separate, and I'd like to. So if I put a WPP lens on, we did talk about when the pandemic first hit us that we'd done decades worth of digital innovation in just a few months. But I think if we look at digital transformation as an experience-led approach, and data transformation is then about relevance. And so I think from a customer employee benefit and what's being used from data transformation versus digital, I think there's an overlap, but they require different skills, they require a different use case, and they require a different approach. But I totally agree with you, you can't just throw tech at it. But that's how we're approaching the two. We did have one person in one of our agencies who covered both, and I think the remit was too big to try and capture the breadth of stakeholders across both of those disciplines and make the job quite unwieldy.
Brilliant, thank you. So I'm going to come across to Jennifer now and ask you a little bit about what does good look like? You know, what's the hallmarks of organizations that are successful in transformation, or what you've experienced as successful?
Thanks for that question. And I just would add on quickly to the prior one, if I might just add one comment to it, just to really delineate, as Di was saying, and that's how you're going to see what is successful, right? Digitization and versus digitizing versus data, like all of these words are sort of floating around out there. But to become a digitally transformed company, you basically are changing your operating model. And if you're changing your operating model, that's everything, not just the data. So I do think it's an enormous undertaking, and it keeps all of these components that people, process, technology, data, all of those things, right? Not just the shiny new toy, that help us digitally transform. And the hallmarks of seeing what good looks like is you start to see behaviors change. Again, we're talking about people and culture and operating models. And basically we know sort of by all of our experiences that every system breaks at some point. So why not build a culture really that starts to, that doesn't let it break, or at least has a strength to band together when something goes wrong when you're trying to do these transformations. So I think of it much more, you know, a hallmark of an organization, small or large, are the people that are committed to making the operation and the transformation happen and banding together to solve these problems versus, you know, the finger pointing or some of the other ways of operating that we've seen in the past. So it's really a cultural transformation that enables the digital transformation and the data transformation to happen.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jennifer. Diana, would you like to add anything to that?
I think it all goes down to people, because we do a lot on driving cultural change through data, and there's many nuances to that, on accepting learnings instead of calling it failures, you know, being okay with presenting some results that didn't go as expected, acknowledging vulnerabilities. If I don't really understand AI, I think data's boring. You know, this is the barriers that we're challenging a lot as we create a data and AI community. We've created an AI Academy. So really making sure that in order to maximize success, we're bringing people on the way, because to go back to your earlier, you can chuck tech at anything, but if you build it, they will not come. You need to bring people in as part of that journey and increase data literacy in all the organization. And I think that would have more of a driver of success than any data or tech in the world. And we have a data philosophy at WPP. It's an attitude that drives behavior, and we're very deliberate about that language, and that every single one of our 100,000 employees is part of that, and that they all need to have basic literacy and awareness of data and AI, and to be able to have an interesting conversation about it.
Di, I think that's a really good hallmark, is the ability to actually have learning and development on this topic as a fundamental training program or activities of your organization. And that's a hallmark. It's another hallmark, Louise, if you're looking for another one, is actually if you've committed and invested in training and teaching and developing your people, because you can't do it without that transformational learning and development program.
We say we invest in data skills before we invest in data. And that is the approach within the organization, that really fine tune and celebrate small data and slow data, and then really great skills on top of it.
And sort of pushing in on that point a bit more, when we look at sort of the resistance that you can get from the human resistance of change, new systems, new processes, being asked to do my job slightly differently and to look for insight from the data to make better decisions for the organization. You know, how do we there's a lot of people out there just don't have the skills or don't believe they have the skills. So how do we actually move them along, and sort of what sort of experience of resistance have you seen in organizations, even in your own organizations, and how have you overcome that?
Can I start with that one? I sort of wanted to build on the great points that we've just had before. You know, there's a European Commission report which has just been published, which makes the point that people invest in data. It wouldn't be great if they did it in data skills, but they invest in data. And the only way they can find to make the case is around operational efficiency gains. So the whole business case is based on some efficiency gain, but really what they're trying to do is change the world in terms of accessibility or greater customer focus. And I think one of the things that we need as an organization to think really carefully, about is how we're going to measure value and imaginative ways of measuring value, so that we don't, for example, flog efficiency metrics when what we're really trying to do with the data is change some other element, and that requires imagination of the whole C-suite. That isn't a technology or a data problem at all.
And from the point of view of the gap at the C-suite level, Miranda, on any of that?
Well, I'm going to reflect something that we said in the pre-brief, so I can't remember which of my brilliant colleagues said it, is that we see CDOs go from sort of CDO position to CDO position. We rarely see them sort of climb into sort of the CEO position or to CITO or whatever position. And that maybe my colleagues will tell you that that's a failure and lack of imagination. I hope that we're going through a growing maturity. One of the things about the pandemic that I have found heartening is that people engage with data in a much more grown-up way, rather than having line graphs which support the argument that I had to start with. We're sort of presenting messy data, which different interpretations can show different things. And so moving on from emailing each other competing spreadsheets to engaging on the same data set and applying different assumptions to it so that we get to different answers, and having that proper debate, I think will help us move forward.
And Jennifer, from your point of view, I mean, how do you talk a lot about the culture. This is all about a cultural change within an organization. How do you bring people with you along the way that perhaps have, missed the data transformation bit, or are just happy to keep doing it the way they've always done it?
Yeah, I think it's a very personalized approach, right? I mean, I think that's what leadership is about. Understanding who you have in your teams, what skills they have, what their, propensity is to change, and then designing programs to help them get there. So, I'm a fundamental, maybe I'm naive still, but I fundamentally believe people are trying to do the right thing at their job, right? They come in, they want to do the right thing. They've built things in the past for companies and, technologies and solutions and processes, and they feel very proud of what they've done. When somebody comes in and says, hey, by the way, I came from the outside and I'm going to tell you we're going to do it differently, that doesn't feel good, right? And so, I'm not all about touchy-feely here, but it makes a difference to the attitudes and the ability of the teams to deliver. They want to feel that they were recognized for whatever contributions they may have done in the past, and that they are supported to change. That's why learning and development is so important. That's why having leadership that actually has been through, transformation and change and are believers in change management. The hardest thing to do is change people. I mean, every data problem we have is kind of a people person and, a people problem in disguise, if you will, right? Because people are people. We're all humans. We want the right things to happen, but they need support. We need support. And I just think there's a lot we can do to lead and help people cope with the changes that are coming, because they are coming. And then the companies or the corporations behind us have to offer solutions to let them get there and give them time a little bit to do that as well. I mean, it's a very, sorry, go ahead, Louise. I can keep going, but I'll
No, it was me stepping in, because I think you're absolutely right. We have a philosophy of reward the behavior you seek. So we just reward good behavior. We don't name and shame if people aren't quite on the bus with us. And that actually then means all our narrative and all the data stories, all the case studies, the platforms that we give people to share, it's all on a really positive lens. And I do think it doesn't matter then how big a company is, small or big, if you just focus on positive and find the people who are responding to the transformation in the way that you want and give them a surface and a stage, I think that does create some quite good momentum and some natural competitivity of other people who want to be given a spotlight.
And I guess the whole idea of, you know, being positive from the top and leading the way and encouraging people to take the journey with you. And as you say, not singling out individuals because they're not doing it the way you want them to do it, but actually trying to be more proactive and say, look what happens when we achieved X as a result of something.
And setting the example of making sure that, you know, if you don't know, it's okay to ask, right? This is about the learning culture that Di's talking about, right? The learning that, you know, it's okay to raise your hand and go, I really didn't understand that. Could you please help me? And without thinking you're going to be embarrassed or you don't know. I mean, it's new stuff for a lot of people. So showing that at leadership level, saying, hey, could you coach me on what you mean by data management or data governance or ethics? How do we want to think about data and ethics, right? Having these conversations and pulling in all the parts of the organization to have a dialogue and then come up with a statement about that it engages the audience, it engages the enterprise at a level that I think, you know, the older models didn't engage the enterprise enough, and the people that really have an opinion and feel like they are worthy enough to share that. So there's many techniques to do that, I think. It's just the hardest thing you have to do, by the way.
And that's why diversity is so important.
Yeah.
Because, you know, the one of the things that we have to do is, you know, when you say, you know, a technology problem is often a people problem disguised. And if we try and solve those problems without a diversity of thought in the room, we're not really going to solve the problem that we want to tackle. And you know, so we can't just have technical geniuses in the room, and neither can we just have, for want of a better word, social scientists in the room. You know, to solve a lot of these problems, we really need to embrace the diversity element.
I think that's a really good point. We were doing some inclusivity training, and this thing, I just can't unsee it now. The training talked about culture add, not culture fit. And I thought, oh, I've hired so much on cultural fit, but cultural add is just a whole new lens that now I'm hiring. I can't unsee that, but it's so important. And as somebody once said to me, it's not diversity and then inclusion. If you have an inclusive culture, you'll get the diversity.
Good point, actually. Culture add rather than culture fit, for sure. So I'm just going to come to one final question for me, because we've got lots of questions coming in from the audience. But, you know, so going back to the point that CDOs are sort of moving over to other organizations rather than, you know, moving up to the more senior roles. And, you know, you can end up having a situation where you've got someone with a financial background, maybe a CFO becoming a CEO, and what they want to see from the transformation is impact on the bottom line, which is really difficult, because we're looking. In the long term, they probably will see benefit from it, but actually it's an investment for the long term. It's an iterative process. It's a journey, and we all know that. What other things can we point to measure success that we don't keep defaulting to? Is this, you know, bringing more EBITDA at the end of the day? I'm going to pass that one over to Miranda. Do you want to comment on that?
Well, I tend to defer to Davin Crowley-Street of Highways England on this one, who's made a fantastic case for treating data as an asset in that organisation. And I have his quote written down, so I can quote it at moments like this. And he says the challenge is to engage the executives so that they understand that somebody a CDO or somebody like that is charged with creating value from the assets versus managing the infrastructure. And the challenge for the data community is to tie what they're doing through a really strong use case to the value they're going to deliver. And if you have those ties really firmly in place, then you're going to be the change that you want to see, I think.
Thanks, Miranda. Jennifer, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one. I come from financial services for many years, and we're always looking at, you know, reducing risk, increasing revenue, or optimizing our costs, let's put it that way, right? Those are sort of the three things that we always look at the top level, if you will, of the levers we have for success. But underneath all of that are a bunch of things that have to happen to make that happen. And that's the stuff, when you get to the CFO level, they don't, maybe necessarily, we're not going to detail all the activities that we have to change and modify to do that. But there are things to measure. Because I think the value of data is basically proportional to the number of people that can use it successfully to create value, right? So, I don't have a formula for that. I know people do have formulas. I know a lot of people that study this to how to value data as an asset, but I think you have to look at some other signs and measurements that help inform the culture being changed, right? The moving to this transformational approach of using data for new business, for new products, but you look at it maybe with a lens of turnover, employee turnover, right? Mm-hmm. Less of it might happen because you're starting to attract more talent that is now willing to stay because they like the opportunities that are presented. And there is an intrinsic value to your organization if you're able to attract top talent and retain them over more than 24 months. That's a big investment already, and you want to capitalize or that get what you paid for out of that investment of 2 years. If they turn around and leave, you really are letting a lot of money walk. So there is a lot of value in employee retention and satisfaction. And I'll stop there because there's other methods to do that. But I think that's one of the other lenses to think about if you want to look for another measure is, are you getting people staying? Are you getting the right capabilities? Are you buying the right skills, and are they staying?
Yeah, good point. So I'm going to go to some of the questions, and I'm going to try and group a couple of them together. But the first one is all about the top tips for measuring data literacy, but I'm going to roll that in with the second question so that we get as many in as we can. And to Di's point on data literacy in the organization, how do we embed this when we're onboarding new employees? So, Diana, do you want to take those couple of questions, measuring literacy and how do we embed it when we're bringing in new people?
So I think there's hard measures. So the absolute number of people who have gone through training, that's not an easy thing. I've made that sound really easy. We're still work in progress on that because we've got videos and we've got content and we've got training, and we want good data practice. So we haven't quite perfected that. My KPI was to demystify AI for 50,000 people across WPP. So that's not a small one. Mm-hmm. I also had to deep skill 5,000 data scientists, and I'm unpacking that and now calling it data practitioners because it's not just data scientists. Let's try and be conscious in our language of the skills. So I'm really making sure that we're data literate in our team on what we're talking about, and we have very good practice in the language. And then we're doing bite-sized content, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, half an hour for everybody, and really trying to tailor some of the training. So we've just put 30 of our most senior people just started a diploma at Oxford Business School on AI for business. So they understand the business case of actually being data and AI literate. And then we've got 2 to 3 hour conversational AI training. So we've invested a lot of time, and I didn't expect my team to end up having such a focus on the literacy. I mean, we've got a data catalog, we've got a whole discovery and curation work stream, and we spend a lot of time building a community that's got 3,000 data and AI members, that anybody's welcome, but all the conversation is always data and AI, and that people can come on that journey with us, and getting that fine balance of not being patronizing, but actually being intellectually challenging and interesting. And we do that through stories. I think the interesting question about onboarding new people is to make sure we've got a really strong relationship with our learning and development team, and we work in very close partnership with them and the agencies. And I think it's almost easier to make sure that people coming in as part of their induction get through the literacy. I'm actually finding it harder for people who've been here for years and they've got a way and a rhythm of doing things, how I interrupt their day and make sure they make time for learning. I think the newbies are going to be easier for us.
Get them fresh and educate. Miranda, anything to add from your side before I go on to the final?
I'm keen to hear audience questions.
Okay, cool. So the next question I've got is, can you share any insightful or inspirational stories about data transformation from your experience? So one for you, Miranda.
Oh, which is my favorite one. So the people who've the challenge is that people dream so enormous with data that they think they're going to transform the whole organization, and I think the challenge is to build it small, so that other people believe, and you'll build momentum going along with it. So one of the organizations I work with, CSense, which sell bike lights and aggregate information about people who travel on their bicycles so that they can be safer, and then bodies can make better decisions about where to put cycling infrastructure. They've always been a data centric company, and they're now selling data, and they're doing it in such a way that they're supporting councils and other people in putting cycling infrastructure in the right place, so that people are making data driven decisions about the promotion of active travel. So that's my feel good story.
Oh, sounds good. Okay, I think we've got time for one more question really quickly. So this one is, what is the panel's point of view on innovation and transformation function? Should it be owned by a center of excellence and someone's key focus of their role, or should it be evenly distributed among all the team members? So Jennifer, I'll come across to you on that one.
I definitely have experienced the mode where it should be a shared opportunity. I mean, I think what I've seen is if you name somebody to the innovation team, it discourages everybody else from thinking they can innovate too. And you never know where the next best idea is going to come from. So I think it's part of everybody's goals and objectives when you do your quarterly or annual planning and success is people are creative. Why limit it to one team and one organizational hierarchy when in fact, the ways of working should be much more gravitational towards the best ideas and who's got them and helping people express them. So for me, it's a distributed model, not even evenly distributed because it may not be even, it depends, right? But it's the distributed model for innovation with a place to go to have a community conversation and that kind of thing to bubble up these ideas, some mechanism to bubble up the ideas and get them in the queue of what's going to work and what we can take forward and who can help them move forward.
Brilliant. I think we've run out of time. We could go on forever.
We could.
Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a real pleasure. I look forward to continuing the dialogue, and no doubt there will be many great things to come from us as a group of women working in this particular area. So I hope you have a great day enjoying the rest of the summit, and thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.